Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for 𝗪cie∞. We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. We're Charlie Roumeliotis. I am Pat Boyle. Hawks on a 4-game road trip. They lose their third straight late last night, early this morning in San Jose. How you doing today, Charlie?
Holding up. I didn't get to bed until about 2:30 last night, so my body is recovering, but we're hanging in. The weather outside today is making it nice.
It is. I'm actually going to try to tee it up.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. I'm only going to play downwind holes today.
That's probably the smart. It's a marathon this summer.
Let's get into Bedard versus Celebrini, part 1, NHL style. It was the first meeting between the North Vancouverites and their the first overall picks in the last 2 seasons. The advantage in round 1 goes to Macklin. He picks up a helper in San Jose's 4-2 victory. He had 4 shots on goal. Bedard had 2 shot attempts, no shots on goal, and a 10-minute misconduct for abuse of the officials. So let's start there, Charlie. 9 minutes into the third, Bedard wasn't happy with a no call. He thought Ferraro clearly tripped him. And he had what seemed to be a benign conversation with Chris Rooney when he returned to the bench about it. You could see him say, not a penalty, okay, whatever. Didn't seem to be too heated. The next thing you know, he was given a 10-game misconduct for abuse of the officials. So, again, we're going to play armchair lip reader and psychologist and whatever else you want to throw into the hat. But what did you think of that whole scenario?
Yeah, so I admittedly barely watched the second half of the third period because I was really trying to narrow down looking at the video, both on the CHSN broadcast, but also the angles that San Jose was showing, because maybe they showed something differently. Because what they were showing on the CHSN broadcast, it was awesome. It was the play leading up to it. Connor Bedard getting tripped by Mario Ferraro that went uncalled. He was upset about it, but he wasn't skating back to the Chicago bench jawing at the officials. So he got back to the Blackhawks bench, and then something must have happened on the next whistle where the part of me that bothered me is the official went over to the Chicago bench. It wasn't the other way around where Connor went out of his way to go to the official to voice his displeasure. So veteran Chris Rooney skated to the Chicago bench. Clearly, Connor Bedard said something that upset Chris Rooney. I thought maybe when looking at the replays, because again, you're trying to lip read, you're trying to see what was it was really hard for me to piece together. I thought maybe that Connor Bedard had inadvertently spit in the direction of the officials because he just naturally spits like a lot of hockey players. But that wasn't the case, because after the game, Connor Bedard was saying, he confirmed that I said something that he didn't appreciate. And so it was very weird trying to piece it together. And the weird part about it, Pat, is we've seen Connor jaw at the officials far more than what he did in that game. So I actually thought Connor showed a little bit of restraint by not being overly frustrated. Here's what I will say. I do know that the officials have an inner circle and they probably talk amongst each other. So I don't know if this was something that Connor has been developing a reputation among the officials, that he is a little jawy with them. And maybe veteran Chris Rooney went into the game saying, hey, I'm going to keep an extra eye out on this. But unless Connor's not specifically warned about it before the game, I'm not sure how you go directly to a 10-minute misconduct when, judging by the video that we saw, it didn't seem very blatant.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we have to be careful to think that the amount of video we saw is what we need to judge. I mean, there's a lot before that. There's a lot after it. If you saw when Nick Foligno was trying to get the explanation from Rooney as to why the 10-minute misconduct was called, Rooney made a two sign, peace sign, so to speak, if you're just listening to this podcast. And at first I was like, oh, it's 2 minutes. And, obviously it was 10 minutes, so it had nothing to do with that. So maybe he was saying second time tonight.
Right.
That, he was lippy with me. We've had him mic'd up, Connor, a handful of times in his young NHL career. I think back to the Patrick Kane Red Wing game last season, and he was chirpy with the official about a call saying that Patrick took a dive. And so, maybe there is a little bit of a reputation that is following him a little bit. And maybe Rooney had a short fuse because of that. I don't know. I thought 𝗙ance 𝗟𝗶𝗟 made a great point on our post-game show on CHSN. He said he'd like to see, when there are nights like this, a pool reporter have access to the officials and get the explanation from Rooney so that we are having an intelligent, well thought out conversation about this, that the officials, that the player are on the same page going forward as, okay, he stepped over the line because he said this, or, whatever the case may be, transparency. And this also goes back to, and we're seeing this in other sports. We've seen it with Major League Baseball in the last couple of seasons. When a call is made on the field or on the ice, give a 5 or 6 second explanation to the crowd and to the viewers at home as to why it was goalie interference, why it was not goalie interference. So I think this is something the league can look into. Little more transparency, little more clarification. And I think we'd be having a little bit less guesswork and talking about lip reading and whatnot if the league got out in front of things like this.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And by the way, I want to be clear. I'm not absolving Connor Bedard of any responsibility. He even took ownership of it afterwards. He said, I have to be more careful with my words. It's just for us, and you talk about it bang on right there about needing the transparency between the officials, the fans, even the Chicago bench seemed confused. I'm going based off of what the reaction to the Blackhawks was too, because Anders Sorensen is saying after the game, he's like, I've heard worse, so they're kind of like, they didn't feel like it crossed a boundary. But I will admit, and I will take a step back from my stance, Pat, if you are correct in your assessment of potentially Connor being warned earlier in the game and it happened the second time, then I think for sure then the official made the right call and should have stepped in.
Did you see Rooney make that gesture towards Nick?
I didn't. I honestly didn't see that. So
okay,
I'm glad
it's after the call is made. Nick comes out looking for the explanation as to why. They begin to skate apart, and Rooney is getting ready to drop the puck, and he's looking at, and again, that could have nothing to even do with what Bedard, right. But again, we're trying to piece this together as to trying to figure things out.
Yeah, Troy Murray brought a great point on the broadcaster in the post-game show, saying the players that wear letters on their jersey, like those are the guys that are kind of the buffer to the rest of the team, and so he was saying, like, sometimes if a player that doesn't have a letter on their sweater is jawing at the official, they're less lenient to kind of have a conversation with them. And so maybe that was a situation where Connor had been going back and forth at the official, and they're like, hey, funnel it through your leadership group, especially your captain. I will say this, though. I don't think this is kind of a one-off incident by Connor. I do think he's growing frustrated by the lack of penalties that have been called against him this year. So I went back and looked at some of the numbers. So last year, in 68 games, he drew 25 penalties, which was tied for 46th in the entire NHL. This year, 66 games he's played in, he's drawn only 12 of them, which is tied for 129th. So Connor is probably like, what's going on here? Like, what do I have to do to draw more penalties? And this was kind of how Sidney Crosby was early in his career, where he didn't get a lot of penalties called and he would whine at the officials a lot. And so this isn't abnormal to Connor being like a little, whatever, young, trying to find it. I think he's genuinely frustrated with the lack of penalties. And that one was so blatant. He's probably like, what do I got to do to draw penalties? Because I haven't been getting any this year.
Yeah, and neither have the Blackhawks. I think a little while back they had the fourth least amount of penalties called against them. When your star player is, what did you say, 149th or what have you?
129th. Yeah.
129th. Yeah, that does seem odd, but it would also fit with the narrative that there's a bit of a reputation that is building, and again, that's something to look at, like you said, Anders Sorensen said, I've heard worse. Bedard said, I didn't think what I said was too crazy, but obviously he's the ref, so he gets to make the call. So you got to live with it. My question to you is Connor putting more pressure on him to produce in a game like last night against Celebrini, when you have days leading up to it where he's being asked ad nauseum about his buddy Macklin and about growing up in North Vancouver and playing with him and training with him and what it's going to be like to face him for the first time in the NHL? Does that add to the already immense pressure that he puts on himself? And when things don't go the way he wants in a game, we see a reaction like we did last night. And I say this and I preface this with a big game Saturday in Vancouver, his second trip to his hometown. And we all know how the first one went. And again, he was in the midst of a slide, and it was, November, and this team was struggling mightily offensively. But there might be something to him adding pressure to himself in certain games. And I wonder if that's also what led to last night's situation.
Yeah, I don't know if Connor would ever say it publicly, but I do think internally he elevates these games in his mind that he wants to make sure that when the eyes are on him and the spotlight is on him, he wants to be able to perform, because that's the standard that he holds himself to, whether it's Connor McDavid versus Connor Bedard on hockey night in Canada at the United Center, and the McDavids and the Bedard family are sharing suites. Like, those are elevated games in his mind, and he wants to be able to produce, similar to the Vancouver game in November that he had his hometown. He was going into a goal drought. Like, it was all this stuff that was, he puts added pressure on himself already. And I got to be honest, Pat, that was actually part of the frustration for me last night of Connor getting the 10-minute misconduct, because it's like the NHL was literally hyping up all day.
Yeah.
Bedard versus Celebrini.
Front page of NHL.com.
Yeah. And it's like, okay. And again, veteran Chris Rooney is a respected official, longtime NHL ref. So I'm not putting this on him, but it was just like, man, if they could have just been a little bit more lenient in that situation, again, not to absolve Connor from any blame, but if it was that ticky-tacky from what we were gathering and from what the Blackhawks bench felt and what Connor felt and what Anders Sorensen felt, it's like, man, just let them play, because it's a late game for the local fans, so they're staying up watching Macklin Celebrini versus Connor Bedard. And the Hawks are down by 1 midway through the third period, and it's like they don't have their guy on the ice. So it's frustrating that it's like, I don't want to say like, oh, it's so NHL, but it was like, it wasn't so egregious where it was like, you needed to get Connor out of there because he was a loose cannon.
Yeah, no, but we also, this is a teaching moment too. And we talked about it earlier that a reputation may be forming. There have been various times we've had a mic on him. We have heard the conversations. They probably have crept over the line a bit, especially from a rookie last year, a second-year player, even a highly touted one that is being labeled the next generation of the league. That being said, he's got to learn from that, just like he's got to learn other things about the game on the ice. He needs to understand the game with the referees and the officials, and if he's getting the reputation that he's delivering too much lip service to them, and that's leading to Rooney's short fuse last night, then he needs to combat that. And so, hopefully cooler heads will prevail and they'll take a look at this, and whether it's Foligno or Maroon or whoever, or even if it's, Davidson or Anders, have conversations with him like, look, we found out we went to this official and this official, and they said this. And so we just want to let you know, let's curb that narrative, and let's see if we can reshape it here as you continue what we expect to be a very, very long and successful career.
For sure. I'm right there with you. And it certainly is going to be a teaching moment for Connor Bedard. I don't want to make it seem like I'm over-indexing the other way and like defending Connor in his actions. I do thought Connor showed a lot of humility in the post-game show.
I do too.
Because I think he did understand I put my team in a difficult position, because if it was so egregious that Connor like vehemently disagreed with it and he felt like he was wronged, I feel like he would have pushed back a little more, saying, but he was, even when he left the penalty box, you can tell like he was disappointed in himself that he put his team in that position. And so I do think it is going to be a learning lesson for Connor Bedard. And I imagine some of the veterans in that locker room too are going to pull him aside and have conversations with him, because again, like this was Sidney Crosby's reputation in his very early years. He was a whiner. He was a complainer, always at the officials, yelling at calls. And Crosby, over time, realized this is exactly what the opponent wants. Me wasting energy on yelling at the officials and not getting calls or whatever. And once Crosby got past that stage and he started getting hacked and whacked, and he wasn't retaliating both to the opponent or the officials, that's when calls started to go his way. And that's when he started to become like by far the best player in the world. And so I do think it's going to be a learning lesson for Connor. He's going to realize it over time, but hopefully this is the thing that kind of ignites it moving forward.
Yeah. And look, again, I think Saturday is going to be an interesting test for him back in Vancouver. We all remember the first visit, and that was played up as his first game in Vancouver. Wasn't able to play there last year because of the jaw injury. And, it was arguably one of his worst games of the season. And it ended with a thud, getting the puck taken away and an empty net goal. And then it finished later that night with a 20-minute interview with Scott Oake on After Hours on Hockey Night in Canada, where, it was sound bites that we played for a good week or two, because the reaction to Connor and what he said in it, saying that, this season had been trying, and that, he felt responsible for the lack of scoring, and he was putting just so much blame on himself. And it was like, wow, thankfully, a lot has happened since that time, and that narrative has been, pushed to the side. But this is round 2 in Vancouver on the heels of what happened in San Jose on Thursday night. This is going to be an interesting test for Connor in his young career.
For sure. And that it's going to be a talking point on the Hockey Night in Canada panel, so
Sure.
He's going to be asked about it leading in. And so, yeah, it's definitely going to be a test for him. I think he will respond much better in this game than the first game. It just feels like the Blackhawks are in such a better place now than they were in November, where you got guys like Frank Nazar up here playing very well, by the way. I thought he was the best player in San Jose for the Blackhawks. He got rid of the off-ice distractions, no Seth Jones. They have Spencer Knight in the goal. So that it feels like the team psychologically is in a much better place. And hopefully Connor will get rid of that bad taste in his mouth, not just from the 10-minute misconduct in San Jose, but the last time he was in Vancouver and had to answer some tough questions about his game personally.
I was a little surprised that Jason Dickinson was on his wing in San Jose. I understood to a degree why they did it in Colorado on Tuesday night. I think it was
Monday night.
Monday night. And I thought, it was a big test for Jason being out for over a month with a high ankle sprain. But I was like, well, they're taking on Colorado. He's going to have a little more defensive responsibility against, which you expected to be a tough line that they would go up against. Also the ability to take some draws. But against San Jose, I kind of figured they'd go back to Nazar. They did, in the game, flip Dickinson and Donato and had Ryan on there. Your thoughts on what we might see on the Bedard line Saturday in Vancouver and, kind of what we've seen this week?
Yeah, it made sense why Dickinson was on that top line for Colorado for the reasons you just mentioned. Like, they were probably going to want Nathan MacKinnon and Marty Necas's line on Connor. And so they wanted that defensive responsibility on the line. But going into San Jose, I thought, especially as the game went on, we saw it in the third period where Nazar got put on Bedard's line with Colton Dach because Nazar was flying against San Jose. And so I personally would like to see Nazar and Bedard stay together. Obviously, I've been banging my fist on the table for months about how 𝗏𝗏, Bedard, and Bertuzzi have not played. I was literally looking this up yesterday. It's like they've played, I think it's 9 minutes of 5-on-5 time together this season. So like that, those two players like have not played. Let's see, it's 909 specifically. They've played together.
And Bertuzzi's gone, 18, 19 games?
Yeah, he hasn't scored in 2 months. I mean, that's the only time Bertuzzi has really clicked this year was that stretch of 2 to 3 weeks when he was playing with Connor. Yeah, and that he was scoring a lot of the power play goals too with that one knee down. And so it gets to a point where with Tyler Bertuzzi specifically, so you get into a goal drought, then you move in lower into the lineup, right? And then when the goals still aren't coming, at some point you have to kind of like get him back into a higher role so he can break out of it. Not saying this would be the game to do it, but I do think with Nazar's confidence right now and how Bedard is playing, or how Bedard and Nazar seem to be feeding off each other, I wouldn't mind them putting Bertuzzi on that left wing to kind of do the dirty work and let Bedard and Nazar do their thing skill-wise. I realize that puts a situation where you have to drop Colton Dach down in the lineup, but I would sacrifice that in the short term to get Bertuzzi going and to get Connor and Nazar more ice time together.
What did you think of Jason Dickinson's cross-check on Celebrini and then the subsequent fight with Barclay Goodrow?
Yeah, so when I was looking at the video, it didn't look like Dickinson was intentionally trying to hit him like near the neck area. I think he was trying to do it in the back, and the stick kind of just rode up. It was a penalty, right? And so then the next shift after, I think it is when Barclay Goodrow ended up dropping the gloves with Jason Dickinson. By the way, Dickinson can throw some haymakers.
Oh my goodness, did he comport himself admirably in that fight? I mean, Goodrow is no slouch, and I thought Dickinson, if you're scoring that fight, I think Jason gets the slight nod.
Yeah. Here's what I'll say though. If the roles were reversed, where someone did that to Connor Bedard,
exactly,
the Hawks would want that response too.
Absolutely.
So I have no problem with it.
Exactly the way I looked at it. If the shoe were on the other foot, you would have seen somebody go out there and make amends for doing that to Bedard.
Right. And we saw that too when Bedard got when he broke his jaw last year. I think was it Nick Foligno or someone and he broke his hand or whatever. Yeah, you're right. He broke his finger doing it. So I have no problem with it. Credit to Jason Dickinson for stepping into that position, even though he's like, I got a penalty for it. I don't know what else you want me to do, but I would have done the same thing if I was San Jose.
Levshunov's first couple games, what have you thought?
Yeah, much better in the Colorado game than the San Jose game. I don't know if maybe he was just playing on adrenaline in Colorado. And I think as a team, the first period in San Jose was just like terrible as a whole. And so it was hard. It's hard for me to single out like Levshunov specifically. The one thing I'll say is his skating ability is so evident. Like he is a guy that, there were multiple moments in the last couple games against Colorado and San Jose where he found himself in the offensive zone, and it's like it took him a few strides to get back to his defensive positioning. Like he is an elite skater, but what has impressed me the most is his confidence to play his game. Whether it was the Colorado game where it was like a shift or two into the game, Ross Colton knocks the stick out of his hands, and he's following Ross Colton around like just fearless, right? And then there was a 5-on-3 power play in Colorado where Hawks had nothing going, and Levshunov took it upon himself to be the shooting first type mentality and generate a couple of scoring chances. So I don't see any timidness to Levshunov's game. And the amount of times I've seen Levshunov like redirecting traffic with his stick or with his voice, I'm like, that guy's the second youngest player in the entire NHL.
That's crazy.
I mean, that shows his confidence right now.
It is. And again, like, to think he's been in 5 different leagues in less than 3 years. He's gone from Belarus to the U.S. Hockey League in Green Bay, to East Lansing, the NCAA, to Rockford, the AHL, to now the NHL in less than 3. That is a lot. Factor in he's the second youngest player in the league. We always talk about the European player getting used to the North American style and the smaller rink. Look at all the added layers that Levshunov has had to navigate through. It's freaking impressive.
It really is. And honestly, when I saw that the Blackhawks called him up, a part of me kind of was holding my breath, because I was like, man, I would caution the Blackhawks to kind of yank him around too much, because he's been from Belarus to the USHL to college to the AHL to the NHL in less than a 3-year span. But then you look at the way that he played in Colorado and you see the confidence that he's playing with. And I'm like, man, the Blackhawks development staff, they obviously have a great pulse on this guy's development, because he didn't show any signs of timidness or whatever, like being overwhelmed at the moment. And so credit to him. Tough start to the season, missed all of camp because of the foot injury. Kind of an up and down start to the year. But then over the last month and a half, if you date back to Rockford, right at the beginning of February, end of January, he's been playing awesome for the Blackhawks and the Rockford Ice Hogs collectively.
I thought overall the Hawks seemed to lax defensively in that first period in San Jose. And, this is the first time we saw Spencer Knight start back-to-back games for the Blackhawks. I didn't think he had his best night as a Hawk. I would say that Will Smith goal, I think Colton Dach maybe screened him and he just didn't track that puck. But it was from distance, and you normally would think that he would pick up that puck at some point. Again, I'll go back to, I want to see Dickinson back on that checking line role with, say, Slaggert and Foligno, put Nazar on the wing with Bedard and Dach, and keep that Teuvo, Donato, and Mikheyev. What has gotten into 𝗬𝗏 Mikheyev? I have to stand corrected. A few weeks ago said he wasn't producing. I know he plays well. He plays hard. He's fast, but we just didn't see the production. Wow, man, we've seen the production. He's got 15 goals, and only one of those goals is shorthanded. The other 14 are 5-on-5.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy for a guy that's likely going to finish north of 20 goals and 0 power play. He just doesn't get any. And I will say, if you go look at his numbers from the first month and a half, 2 months of the season, he had 2 goals. He was barely producing. And so he really has been awesome. I think that's exactly the kind of player that the Hawks were hoping to get when they made the trade. It just took him a while to get there.
Yeah. Okay. So Bedard returns to Vancouver. Any storyline that you're looking at besides that on Saturday night? Our last 9:00 game of the season.
Woohoo! The storyline I am following the most in that game, outside of Connor Bedard's return to the hometown, is I want to see the Vancouver disaster for myself, because I have no idea. It's like Quinn Hughes is hurt. Elias Pettersson he's got, I think, a goal in 3 of his last 4 games. But prior to that, he was on an 18-goal drought. JT Miller's thriving with the Rangers. Thatcher Demko, I don't even know what the heck's going on with him anymore. I mean, what a fall that from where they were last year. And hopefully the Hawks are able to capitalize on a reeling Canucks team that are somehow still find themselves in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, they're right there with Calgary. I think they're tied for the final playoff spot, the second wild card in the West. So that is on Saturday night, Charlie will have the call with Troy and John on WGN Radio. I will have Frank Saravalli in studio on the Blowtorch CHSN, and it'll be Rick Ball and Tony Granato calling the action from Vancouver. That is going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast, presented by Toyota. Have a great weekend, and we will catch you next time.